I am super psyched to be here, and I appreciate NovaFlex having me come on because I'm excited to talk about this today.
We are so excited to have you here too, Tim. This is a meaty topic. This is
Whew.
something that I'm sure that people are excited based on the registrations to learn more about. And I'm so grateful that you're generous enough to share with us. So thank you for that, and thanks for being here. For all of you who are tuning in, use the chat box to say hello. Let us know where you're coming from, and feel free. You can talk amongst yourselves there. You can send us messages if you like using the chat. But if you have a question for Tim, use the Q&A. And if you accidentally, use the chat, we can promote it to the Q&A. So if you see your message disappear, it probably got moved over to the Q&A. So thank you all for saying hello, and thanks for letting us know where you're tuning in from and what you're eating. Really appreciate that. Today we have the distinct pleasure of having a master photographer and educator with us, Tim Cooper. I'm also really proud to say that he's my business partner and my friend. I've learned a lot from him through the years of working with him, and I'm really delighted that not only is he's using NovaFlex now, but he's chosen to share with you some really incredible techniques about how to post-process panoramas after you've captured them. So everybody who's here, if you're wondering how to put it together after you've made the pictures, this is the right session to attend. Tim, we're really delighted to have you here. I know I've said it a couple times, but I just wanted to say thank you again. And without any further ado, I'm going to hand the reins over to you and let you introduce yourself the rest of the way.
Great. Well, before you disappear, Matt, I just want to thank you because I used to photograph quite a bit of panorama imagery back in the day before I was doing night photography. And it was a very, very rudimentary system, right? It's like, okay, 50 millimeter or 70 millimeter lens, that's it. Everything's going to be at a distance, and it's going to be really super simple. But it's funny that when I started doing a lot more night photography, I guess I got involved in thinking about new projects, light painting, new types of things that I hadn't done before. And so kind of panoramic photography went by the wayside. But after you introduced me to NovaFlex, I realized how using precision equipment really makes the post-processing a lot easier. And you know me, I don't mind post-processing. I love I love post-processing. But when I found that using the precision equipment it made it so much easier, I thought, oh, this is great. And so thank you for getting me on board back to doing something that I loved and blending it with something that I, something new to me, or newer to me. So thank you. Yeah.
Oh, my pleasure, Tim. Can't wait to see what you show us today.
Yeah. All right. So I guess I should start off by saying thank you all for coming. I appreciate you being here. One of the things that I really love most about photography is sharing and teaching. And I like to say sharing actually rather than teaching, because I have learned so much over the years from everybody that I've worked with. And that's students, other instructors, everybody. So I kind of think of this all as one big gathering of like-minded people that share information. I'm currently one of the partners of National Parks at Night. That's our organization, along with Matt. We run that with a couple of other folks, Gabriel, Chris, and Lance. And we love night photography. We love all things night, from light painting to Milky Way to shooting in cities and towns. And anything night is what we like. As you heard me allude to earlier, I used to do a lot more panoramic imaging when I was shooting landscape during the daytime. But now with my new NovaFlex system, I'm finding, boy, it makes things so much easier to do at night. Everything from the click stops to just the fine precision makes it so much easier to dial it in. Whereas before, I wouldn't want to try to figure this all out in the dark. now it is just a piece of cake. So I'm using the Trio Balance 3-section leg, which if you're not familiar with NovaFlex equipment, once you use it, you'll never go back to anything else. It's just so wonderful. Along with the System 2 heavy duty Pano head. And this has allowed me to create, as I keep saying, I keep using the word precision, and for, apologize for repeating myself, but it's the one thing that I note more than anything else. It allows me to create these images that when I put them together, the night sky and the foregrounds, it's just effortless, as you're going to see. And that's what I want to demonstrate to y'all today. I want to take you right from the beginning. We're not going to talk about capture today. What we're going to basically talk about is post-processing. So I've already captured the images. I'm going to start in Lightroom, and then I am going to bring things into PTGUI, and then we'll finish it off in Photoshop. So let me go over to my Lightroom here and tell you where we've started. Matt, is everything looking good?
Yes, sir. Sounding good too.
And we're seeing Lightroom up on the screen?
Yes, sir.
Perfect. Excellent. So here, folks, what I've done is created two series of photographs. For this particular series, what I did was, and Matt was actually with me on this shoot. We were shooting the arches, the windows in Arches National Park, and this was made under moonlight. You can see we got the starry sky, we've got a moonlit foreground, and I did a series of panorama. I think it was like about a 50 millimeter lens, maybe 70. Let's see what we've got here. 68 millimeter lens at ISO 6400. Now, the next thing I did was, because I had preset my base to the proper amount of click stops on my Pano rig, my NovaFlex Pano rig, I was able to just leave my camera set up so that when the Milky Way came out, I nearly had to go back to the original click that I started at, which was easy to find, and then shoot the same images again with the Milky Way behind it. All right. So this system was really helpful in helping me to capture just exactly what I wanted. And ultimately, I want to blend these two together. Now, what's going to be paramount is that the alignment and everything is perfect between these images, so that when we go to put them together, this lines up nicely with this. All right. And we can do that using PTGUI. I think on this one, the image dropped a little bit due to my error. So we'll see how to fix that in PTGUI. All right, so the first thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to approximate what my file is going to look like, because these are all very large files, and putting them all together in a panorama is going to become an enormous size file. So I want to make sure that what I'm inputting into PTGUI and then ultimately Photoshop to blend together is really as close as it can be to the final. I'm always going to want to make adjustments later on, and that's not a problem, but I want to make sure they look good to begin with. So before I even go into the stitching software to begin putting these images together, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at these and adjust them first, right? So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to choose one, let's say, that's got a fair amount of Milky Way in it, like this. And then I'm going to find its partner, which for the moonlit shot would be this one. And what, excuse me, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these two photos from Lightroom. Well, to begin with, before I even start with that, let me get back to the beginning. What I'm going to do to start with is I'm going to choose the image that I want to work on first and ensure that I've got certain things set. So for example, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to put remove chromatic aberration and enable profile corrections on this image to make sure that is set. We want to bring the images into PTGUI in the best form that we can. Now, after that, what I'll do is I'll rough out the look of the image. And here you can see I've changed the exposure and contrast a little bit, whites, blacks. For the night sky, it's really common for me for the Milky Way to add a bunch of whites And typically exposure is important because you can see I shot this at 12,800, and that image is, the sky's a little dark, but that's what you get on a completely moon-free moment of the night. So I increase the exposure a little bit and increase the whites and a little bit of dehaze. A little dehaze goes a long way. So that's without the dehaze. And then that is with 28 plus points of dehaze. You can see it brings out the Milky Way a little bit. And I actually decreased my saturation a little bit here because it was originally too saturated because I was using the profile Adobe Landscape. You'll see that it'll typically come in as Adobe Color. The moment that you change it, let me put the saturation back to 0 here. The moment that you change it to Adobe Landscape, suddenly things get more saturated and a little bit more contrasty. So I may use Adobe Landscape for the night sky, or a lot of times we'll actually use Adobe Neutral too, which is super flat, and then come in and adjust it later. But for this one, I chose Adobe Landscape, and the saturation was a bit much, so I brought it down to -8. All right, now, at this point, I've got my image roughed out kind of where I want it to be. Most importantly was adding in checking the remove chromatic aberration and enable profile corrections. Now, at this point, what I'm going to want to ensure is that every one of those same images of that same series, let's call this a series, also has the same settings. So I'm highlighted on this one by holding down my Command or Control key on a PC. I can just click these other images. Now, at this point, I can choose to sync settings. I could have done the same thing if these were selected back in the Develop module by hitting sync down here. All right. So let's see if we've got this. Having a hard time seeing the bottom of my screen here. So I'm just going to go back to the library module and we'll do the sync settings from there. I'm going to hit sync settings down in the lower right. And here I'm going to choose check all so that anything I've changed will be synchronized across all of the images. All right. So we've synchronized that. Now the next thing I'm going to do is go and do the same thing to this other series, which is, we'll call it the Moonlight series. So I'll click on an indicative image like this one. Notice that this is the active image, even though they're all selected. This is the active image. And I'll go to my Develop module and make some changes again, which I have already done for the sake of brevity here for today's course. So you can see I brought up the exposure a little texture and clarity to bring out some of the detail in the sandstone here. And I think this is about right, hoping it's about right. We don't know for sure though. And this brings us to our next thing. How are they going to look together? We don't know, all right? So the best thing to do is to try it before we start stitching everything together inside of PTGUI. So let's see, we'll choose this one again because this has got the most Milky Way and its partner is up here. So Command or Control click on that to select both of them. Now what I'm going to do is something that I actually do all of the time when working in Photoshop coming from Lightroom. And that's called creating a smart object as layers. What this allows me to do is look at them look at them in real time as they're blended together, make changes to the raw image, and then come back and apply that in Lightroom. So for example, we've got both of these images selected. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to Photo, Edit in, and choose Open as Smart Object Layers in Photoshop. All right, now, by doing that, we'll launch both of these images into Photoshop and they will become one file, but that one file will be composed of two different smart objects. And this is a really beautiful way to work if you can get used to it. So Let's go over to Photoshop and see if this is opening up for us. And there we go. All right. So right down here, we have our 2 layers. And you may notice this little icon in the lower right. That signifies that it is a smart object. We don't have that when we typically just open up images as regular layers in Photoshop. So watch the beauty of this. To make things simple, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on the Milky Way image and put it on top. And just so you can see that again, I'm clicking on the thumbnail itself, not here on the words, not over here, not on the eyeball. Where you touch it really makes a difference. So click right on the thumbnail itself. And as I move it up, you're going to see a blue line appear. And when I get that blue line above, I just unclick. Now my Milky Way is on top. Now, I don't know if these are registered or, I could have been off a little bit, who knows, but I'm just going to go ahead and create a mask and we'll see what happens. So being on this upper layer, if I go to make a selection, like say select sky, it's going to select it from that layer. If, however, I was on this layer, and you can see the highlight is on here now, and I choose select sky, it would choose it from this layer. So I want to choose the sky in the sky layer. So I want to be sure to be on that layer or have that layer active. Okay, so we go select sky, and hopefully it'll do a good job here. Takes a little bit, and it does a good job of selecting the sky. Now, this is just a selection. What we need to do is we need to have this selection be turned into a mask on this image. So the easiest way to think about this is if you had a print laying down on the table and another print laying on top of it, you wouldn't be able to see the image that's below. However, if I was to take a pair of scissors and cut off the top layer, you'd be able to see through to the bottom layer. And that's what we're doing here with these 2 layers. I need to cut a hole. And the way I'm doing that is using a selection and a mask. Now, we selected the sky. So if I go down here to the front loading washing machine, which is called add a layer mask button, and you'll see it looks just like a front washing machine, and I click, it turns that selection into a mask and puts the mask on that layer. This black down here is saying, do not show this foreground. So I selected the sky and said, turn it into a mask. And basically this black area is like what I've clipped off so that you can see to the below. So now what we're seeing through this black is down to this image, which is this down here. All right, now you can see that something is awry here. It's not quite lined up properly. So I made a mistake in my shooting and the heights are different. So what I can do is I can use the move tool. So I'm going to click on this image and I'm going to grab my move tool. And if I'm on this image, it's going to move the upper image. And now the upper image is truly just the sky. And I can roughly place that back into place. Remember, you can also use your up and down, right and left arrow keys when your move tool over here is active. So let me zoom in. And once again, you can see I am on this layer and my move tool is active. So when I use my up and down arrow keys, I am slowly moving this into place. This is the exact type of thing we want to avoid by going into PTGUI and shooting with good equipment and using it properly, which I obviously messed up in this example. All right. So now we have a rough blend. We can see what the image looked like with just the night sky and the moonlit foreground, and then adding in the Milky Way. It's at this point that using the smart objects really becomes invaluable. I actually kind of like where this is blending right now, but let's assume that I wanted to add more light to the foreground. What I could do would be to double click on this little icon on the foreground or the moonlit image. I'm going to double click, and that launches me back into Camera Raw. Now, of course, this is Camera Raw that's associated with Photoshop, but it's the same exact engine that Lightroom works on. So all of our sliders are exactly the same. All of my settings are the way they were in Lightroom. And if I wanted to increase the exposure here a little bit, I could say maybe bring that up to, let's just make an obvious change. So let's go too far. 145 plus 145. Now I'm just going to make a little note of that, plus 145. And I'm going to click OK. We come back, and it prepares the smart object and gives us the preview of what that looks like at 145. Now, what I could also do is change the white balance or the sharpening or the clarity or any of those things that we're allowed to change inside of Lightroom and Camera Raw. So let's just say maybe this is a little bit too warm. I actually think it looks okay, but I'm going to double click on this again. And maybe we add into the color, we add just a little bit less blue. It's at 3,800. Let's pull it down to 3,250. And again, I'll make a note of that, 3,250, and click OK. Likewise, I could come in and I could make changes to the night sky. And I could say, well, you know, maybe it's too saturated or it's too cyan. Maybe I want it to be a little bit more purple blue. And I can click on here. And again, we have access to all the cool things, you know, like dehaze, things that we don't have necessarily adjustment layers for in Photoshop. And let's see, we want color. It seems a little too cyan for me. So I'm going to add in a little bit more magenta. That's too much, but let's just take it over the top so you get the idea. All right, too much. That's the visual equivalent of a sour ball here, but you'll see the changes and we'll make a decision from there. And there we go. Whoa, that's really insulting. Sorry, y'all, to do that to you. So at this point, I'm just going to do Command Z because I can barely stand the look at that myself. And at this point, we say, all right, I know how I want my images to look. And I look at my notes and I say, oh, you know, on the moonlit image, I added 20 points of exposure and whatever it may be, 5 points of, say, texture, and make the notes on the night sky as well. Then we can close out of this image. We don't need to be here anymore. We can return to Lightroom. And at this point, I could take this image in the develop module, go and add in the extra exposure or the color or the dehaze, whatever I did. Once again, sync it across that entire series, and then go over and do the same thing to this. We say, well, with the moonlight, we added, let's go to the develop module. We added a couple points of exposure and we cooled off the white balance a little bit and then sync that. Now, because we went into Photoshop to begin with as test images with a smart object, we're able to determine very closely to what we want our images to look like later on down the line once they get blended together. We've come back, we've synced all of those changes across the images, and lo and behold, here we are with our images ready to go. All right. And once we blend them together, they'll be very close. Sure, of course, we'll have to make some subtle changes, but at least the bulk of the work will be done and it's going to be very close. So before I go any further, Matt, has there been any questions that I can answer?
There have been no questions yet. I think everybody's just hanging on your every word here.
I hope so, and not completely lost.
No, I don't think so. But they'll let us know. Let us know in the chat or the Q&A if you have questions so far, folks.
Please do, folks. I'm happy to answer questions, and we'd hate for you to leave with questions rather than answers. So the next thing I want to do is I want to blend these images together in PTGUI. Why PTGUI? We could do it in Lightroom, sure. We could do it in Photoshop. Absolutely. But as your panoramas get more and more complex, we have the need of a precision that PTGUI supplies to us. All right. And that comes mainly in the fashion of creating control points, which I'll explain and show you in just a few minutes. But it sets that particular piece of software heads and shoulders above other software to create panoramas. Now, you may have had great success, and I've had great success putting together panoramas in Lightroom and Photoshop, both. But when things need to be really tight, PTGUI is the way to go. And in this image, in this series, we've already seen that my images are off a little bit from top to bottom. User error. So I don't want to spend a lot of time doing tricky masking and aligning images and stuff inside of Photoshop. So I'm going to do it in PTGUI and it'll come out exactly correct. So my blend will be super easy at the end of the day. All right. Now, for my workflow at this point, I am turning my images from RAW into TIFF files. All right. I think PTGUI is, and Matt, you can correct me if I'm wrong, they allow raw files to come in, but I haven't quite worked out that workflow yet and determined whether it's better or worse. So for now, I'm using TIFFs. So what I would do is begin by selecting both series, the Moonlight series and the Sky series, and I'm going to export them as TIFFs. So I'm going to go down to the export button down here in the lower left. And what I'm going to do is say, where do I want these files to go to? Well, I actually want them to go back into the same folder as the originals so that my TIFFs are there with my raw files. Okay. Add to catalog will not be checked by default. Check it. That means as soon as you export them, you'll be able to see them in Lightroom. All right. File naming, I'm not going to rename them. You can, if you would like to. You can go down to file renaming and put in any kind of information that you want, from custom text to the original file name. You can edit it and put in anything you want. Just depends on your workflow. For me, I'm not going to rename it. All right. Uncheck that. Next thing is file settings. I don't want it to be original because it's just going to give me extra raw files. I don't want JPEGs because that's a lossy format and it's not as thick and rich with information as TIFFs are. So I'm going to choose TIFF. For compression, none. Color space, Adobe. If you work in the Pro Photo color space, you can choose that as well. I work in Adobe. And most importantly, 16 bits, not 8. A friend of mine used to say, if some is good, more is better. So let's go with 16. That's more bits. It's got to be better, right? It is. It's a lot more information. We don't want to resize the files. However, in the beginning, if you're working with really large files, say from like, I don't know, a Z9 or, one of these huge file size, you could, as a test, resize them to maybe like half their dimensions. My camera shoots the long edge somewhere around 6,000 pixels. So I could put it at like 3,000 if I wanted to. And then this could be your test and you could run it. And if you like the way things come out, then you can go back and do the originals. But for our final, we don't want to resize it. We want this to be as big as possible. This is one of the reasons that we shoot panoramas, to get those nice, rich, big files. All right. Now at this point, what you can do is, since you've set these settings up and you're probably going to use them again, you may as well save them as a preset. So you can go down here to add and call this something like PTGUI TIFF. All right, and hit create. And now next time when you come back in here and you say, oh, I'm ready to export all my raw files to TIFFs, you can just hit your export button, and then not Keynote preset, not blog post image sizing reset, but PTGUI TIFF. And when you click on it, everything here changes to what you need it to be automatically, and you hit export. All right. Now, I've already exported these images and I've created the TIFFs, and they're right here. You'll notice that I've color-coded my different series here. So my Moonlit series is color-coded red, and that's just by selecting and then hitting 6. That turns it to red. If you turn it to 7, they become yellow. 8 is blue, I think, or green. 9 is blue. And purple, you actually have to right-click, and choose color label purple. There is no number for that. All right. So now my blues are my moonlight. My purples are my sky. And as soon as these TIFFs came in, I labeled them a different color so I'd be able to see them very, very easily. And what I also did was I went down here, and instead of capture time, which is how these would have normally come in, what I did was I said, hey, let's change this to color label. And now it puts them all together. So I can see that these are all my TIFFs. The other thing that I've done that you might find interesting is that I can see my the file type right in the right-hand side in the top of my frame here. And the way I've done that is by clicking on any image and going up to view, view options. And once again, if some is good, more is better. So instead of compact cells, I choose expanded cells. And that gives this area down here the ability to put in any sort of information you want. So file name is here, file extension is here, TIFF, exposure time 4 seconds, and megapixels here. You can choose anything you want from this long list of settings. All right. But I like having that file extension on the right-hand side and very visible. So at a glance, I can tell that's a TIFF, because sometimes the extension gets hidden in this long name over here and it's hard to recognize. Super easy to see. TIFF right there. DNG right there. All right. So the fact that when you exported these images to begin with, when you went to export, you had add to catalog. So the moment that you hit export and they're finished loading up, you're going to see them back here in Lightroom. So again, I like to keep everything together rather than exporting to them to the desktop and figuring out how I'm going to go find them and what I'm going to do with them. Because now to get into PTGUI, all I need to do is select all my TIFF files, click on the center of the image, not up on the name, not down here in the corner, not on the stars, but click on the image itself. And I can click and drag that down to the PTGUI icon. That's one way to do it, right? So if I just now drop that into PTGUI, hey, didn't that load up? What happened there? I think I didn't drop it fast enough. Okay, so let me just drop it on there, drop it into PTGUI, boom, it lines up, and this is what we come up with. All right. Now, if you didn't want to do it that way, that's not a problem. You would just you could go right up here to where it says source images and it says add images, and you can drag and drop onto this screen, or you could add your images and go find them yourself. I just find that that way is the quickest. However, maybe you're not sure. Maybe you're one of these folks who really doesn't spend a lot of time working in your folders over here and everything is labeled by date, and you have no idea where that bloody folder is. One thing you can do is you can right click on any image and then choose show in Finder. Go to folder and library. Here we go. So here is that folder. And now I could right click on that folder and say show in Finder. And now it's going to tell me exactly where that folder is on my computer, so that if I'm back in PTGUI and I want to, open up a new project, I can add the images and I know exactly where they are. So that's going to be helpful for folks that have a different naming convention or don't spend as much time. Some people spend more time with collections rather than actual folders, and there's not a right or a wrong. But for certain programs like this, we kind of need to know where our folders are and what their names are and how to get to them. All right. So we're going to start off here now in PTGUI. And what we actually have is what I'm going to call our main window. All right. So we're going to end up inside of PTGUI here with multiple different types of windows. And it can get a little confusing. So right now I'm grabbing on my main window here. And come on, it's not allowing me to move it. Let me hit... bear with me here 1 second, folks. Sorry about that. All right, we'll come back to this. So we are in our main window. We're going to see another window pop up here in a second, but we're going to need to come back to this from time to time. So I want you to be aware that there are a couple of different windows. All right. Notice that we have our entire series loaded up here. We've got our moonlight images and we've got our sky images. What we're simply going to do next is go down step 1, source images, got them. Step 2, set up panorama. I'm going to hit align images. Now, before I go any further, I want to tell you guys that PTGUI is sort of like Photoshop. It is an enormous program with massive amounts of depth, and there's no possible way that I would be able to explain the whole program to you, nor could I, in an hour's time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the necessary steps, and there's going to be things that I don't cover that I'm either going to find unnecessary for you to know at this moment, or perhaps things I don't understand. And we're going to keep it simple. I've created a handout that does exactly what I'm doing step by step. So while this isn't going to be the deepest dive into PTGUI, it will be repeatable by you by looking at this handout or rewatching this video. Okay, so I think Matt can load up a link to that handout. It's like, I don't know.
All done. It's at the
great.
top of the chat now.
Thanks. What is it, like 24 pages or something like that? I don't know.
Yep.
So it's step by step with diagrams and arrows and circles, and it'll get you to create your own projects easily. Between that and the video here, you're going to be set. So forgive me if I don't go over every little thing here that we're seeing. Things like, for example, this is telling me it's a 68 millimeter rectilinear lens. I don't necessarily need to know that. I don't need to deal with that. Camera, full frame, that's here. I could click and go do something with that. I don't need to. So forgive me as I skip over things. I'm just giving you the meat of the situation. So here we're going to hit align images. All right. And at this point, what it's doing is it's aligning both series of images, one on top of another, and hopefully side by side adjacent images. Now, it says PTGUI has analyzed your images, but was not able to match all of them. This is not uncommon. To align all images, you will need to add a few control points manually. These control points, there's a typo in there. These control points indicate which parts of which images should overlap. The control point assistance gives you detailed information about which images require control points. Would you like to add control points now? I'm going to say no. We're going to add more control points, and we're going to come back to this. But this is a good warning. Whenever we see warnings in PTGUI, we should pay attention to them and read them and follow their instructions, okay? So I'm going to say, no, I don't want to. All right. Well, now that's interesting. Look at that, Matt. I've never seen that happen before. Of course, right in the demo, yeah?
Every day is a new day.
I guess maybe every day is a new day. Okay, there we go. I don't know what happened there. It was getting a little weird. All right, so this is what we call our panorama editor. At this point, I want you guys to notice this is a window called Panorama Editor. Behind it, this is the window that we started with. I'm going to call this our main window. We're in our panorama editor, and what we want to do here is to sort of rough out our cropping and our projection of our panorama. So the yellow is the crop lines, so you can just drag them and move them out of the way for the moment. And then off to the left and right here, we have these sliders that will enlarge the box around. And so you can move it so the whole entire image is fitting in. So here you can see I'm not seeing the whole entire image. So I'm going to move this slider to the right a little bit. And now I've got room around the top and the bottom. And might need a little bit more. There we go. And at this point, we're seeing a rough estimate of what our image is going to look like. Next, along with control points, the beauty of PTGUI is that it has many different types of projections. Everything from rectilinear down to transverse vertissimo, which I don't know what that means. But the main thing here we want to do is look at the look of it. All right. So let's choose rectilinear. And by the way, in the in the help, where do we find that, Matt? Is there the help document, or you found a document online that explains each and every one of these?
Yeah, I'll post it. PTGUI has an FAQ page. They don't have a user manual. And what you'll see on Tim's screen is sometimes a yellow tooltip pops up. That's where they hide all the information. Not hide, provide it.
I like that. Yeah. So you can read what they do, and that can be helpful. But truly, what's most important is the look of the image itself. Now, before I go into the projection, what I want to do, and I think this is really important, is I want to set the visual horizon. This center line is where your visual horizon should be. I say visual because here we're at arches, so we're at pretty high elevation. This is not technically the horizon line. The horizon line may be actually down here somewhere. So notice the look of the image change as I click on the image and drag upward. Yeah, click on the image and drag upward. And you can see the shift in the shape of the image. And to me, that's about where the visual horizon line is. And this shape of the image looks much more realistic than it did a moment ago. You'd see this much more with a tall vertical line, say trees or things like that in your image. You'll notice this a lot more. But that's an important first step. So now, once again, I may have to add in a little space so I can see. All right. Now I can go over to my projections and choose one that's going to look okay. And really, it's just a matter of clicking on them and seeing how they change. All right. And after a while, you're going to get the hang of it as far as which one you may like, which one you may not like. For this one, I have determined that Mercator looks more realistic. I notice it brings the edges down and they're not kind of swooping up. And this looks realistic. And you can always come back in again and move that horizon line to make the image look the way you want it. All right. And then the last thing we would do here would be to grab up our crop lines. Now, you could crop right into where you think you're going to want to. There's a little road down here I'm going to ultimately want to crop out. But don't be afraid of leaving a little extra space around it if you want, because you can always crop that later in Photoshop or in Lightroom. So this is just roughing it out. All right, grabbing on each side, pulling it over. I'm probably going to crop way into here and way into here. But again, I'm just going to leave these lines where they are. Crop that way. All right, now we've set up our projection. We've set up our horizon line. And now it's time to just go back over into the main window. All right. And at this point, what we can do is start working our way down the steps here. All right. So we began with Project Assistant, and we can always come back here if we want. Notice that it says PTGUI was unable to detect control points for some of the images. Therefore, you may need to add a few control points by hand. Oh dear. Okay, what does that mean? Well, that's actually below some of the other things we want to do, like mask. But let's go down and hit control points first, seeing how PTGUI is asking about it. When we hit control points, what we're faced with is two side-by-side images. All right. Now, PTGUI has chosen the adjacent images. So forget the different series for the moment. And let's just say we have one series, and that's the Moonlight series. Here, I'm on image 1, and that's this. And then here, I'm on image 2. And you can see that this stack right here is the same on both of them. So the image on the left, I shot, and then I overlapped, and I shot again. And then I overlapped and shot again. So if I went to 2 here, I would need to go to 3 over here. All right. And so this mound is the same as this mound, just like 3 here is the same as 4 there. Okay. So this mound is the same as this mound. Now, what's interesting here, let's go back to where we started, 1 and 2. We've got a lot of control points here that PTGUI has already added. As a matter of fact, we've got 12 of them. That's fantastic. We need at least 5 per pairing for PTGUI to create an adequate blend. So we don't have any problem in here. But if we go up to control points, or rather tools, and go to control point assistant, it may tell us where we have problems. So once again, that was tools, control point assistant. It says orphaned images 9, 10, 11, and 12 do not have any control points. Well, at this point, 9, 10, 11, and 12 are our Milky Way images. Okay. Says your panorama is not ready to stitch. Go to the control point tabs and add some. It also says too few control points. Image 8 has fewer than 4. All right. So we've got a lot of different things going on here. But let me show you how to add some control points manually, and then I'll show you some other tricks. All right. So 1 and 2 look great. Plenty of control points. 2 and 3, great. Look at that. 16 control points. No problem. 3 and 4, ample. 4, 5, ample. 5 and 6, plenty. And then that's it. That's the pairing. So all the Moonlight images have plenty of control points. So now let's move on to the other ones, 7 and 8. You can see that's this one here, stack, and the stack is over here. All right, this has only got one control point. So before I go adding in control points manually, I'm going to try to go to control points, generate control points for 7 and 8. And it was on, oh, it did. It added a few. It added 4. Well, it added 3 to make a total of 4. Okay, that's a good start. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some manually. All right, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go up to 100% here. And then by scrolling up and down, you can see, and right and left, you can see both of these images side by side. And you're going to find a recognizable part of the image on the left that you can identify on the right as well. So for example, we've got this little, these 2 stars right here, and those 2 stars are here and here. So by hovering over the left image, I'm going to click on that star, and I can look at my enlarged thumbnail just to the upper left of the cross, and you'll see I'm not quite on the center of the star, but close. All right, that's good enough. I'll click there, and it immediately goes over and moves the crosshair to the right. Now, with my mouse, I'm going to move it and put it pretty close to the edge there again, and click. Boom, we've got number 5. All right. And in this way, you can go through and manually add control points. And it's best to add them in different parts of the image, across the image if you can. I just accidentally tapped, so I'm going to hit Command Z. And, excuse me. And I'm going to look for other groupings. Here, we've got a grouping of 3 stars right here. And so I'll choose the bottom left one and click. and it created number 5 over there. Okay, so here's a grouping up here of recognizable stars. I click on that one, and PTGUI automatically added the 6th one in. So as you start to go along, it begins to learn. And now when you just click, you don't have to click again. Where in some images, you've got to click on the left and then go find that image on the right. But once you add a few in, PTGUI gets the game, and it's like, okay, I'm understanding what's happening here. So now at this point, I'm going to hit fit again. And you can see over to the right, we now have 7 points, which is good. And we can move on to the next series, 8 and 9. Look at that, no control points at all. So let's start by going generate control points for images 8 and 9. Hopefully it'll be able to figure out a few. And it hasn't. So this is where we're going to have to manually work. All right. So we can see that this knob here is the same as this over here, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in, scroll down, scroll over, go over onto this image, scroll down, scroll over, okay? And I'm going to put a point right in this little V here. And PTGUI is not going to know probably where to put it, and it doesn't. So now I've got to go over and manually put it in here myself. Now, this may seem a little bit tedious, and it can be, but this, once we do this, this gives us absolute precision and perfect blending between our images so that when we go to put them together in Photoshop, it becomes effortless. So it's worth the time to do this. All right, so I'll add just one more here. I'll go to 2, click on that point. Still wasn't able to find it, so I manually have to go over and add that point in over here. And pretty soon, PTGUI is going to get the idea. I click here, and boom, it found it. Okay, so now we can start going up and choosing some stars. As I say, I like to try to spread these control points out a little bit so that they're not just on the landscape, but also in the stars as well, if you can do so. And you would continue on in this manner until you got, let's say, at least 5. All right, so let's just put one more in to get us up to 4. And that's that one. Oh, that's actually 5. All right. Now, I don't want to spend the whole remainder of this lecture going through and setting control points on all of these. But do remember that you can click on 9 and 10, the next in the series, and you can always go control points, create for images 9 and 10. All right. And that did pretty good. Now, at this point, we're setting control points for each of the series next to each other. The next thing you would do, and this is the important part that people will often forget to do, is we need to create control points from, say, 1 in the moonlit to 1 in the stars, the sky field. All right. Now, again, I'm not going to go through and do this because it's just going to get boring looking at it. But remember, come up here, generate control points for 1 and 7, see if it adds some, and it does. And you'll continue through and do that for all of the remaining series. So we have to do the control points between the moonlit series, the control points between the Milky Way series, and then the moonlight to the Milky Way, moonlight to the Milky Way, moonlight to the Milky Way. And in that way, we'll get as perfect a blend as we're going to be able to get. Now, I'm not going to go through this. So what I've done earlier is I have actually gone in and put all the control points in, and I saved that as a project. All right, so that we'd be able to move forward without you guys watching this clicking. So I'm going to click out of PTGUI here, and I'm going to close this file. File, close window, don't save. And yes, I'm back to my original project here, the one that I have, excuse me for one second, the one that I did all the control points on. All right, so we've gone in and we've added control points for all of our images. The next thing you can do is go back to the project assistant here, and let's see, we might want a preview of, let's see, project align images, preview. Nope. Oh, shoot. I lost my panorama editor window. Okay, here we go. So see how when I go to window, you guys, it says panorama editor? It brings me back to the panorama editor window. And once again, we've got this window and we have got the main window. All right. So at this point, I'm seeing all of my images, but if I want to see how they're going to blend, I might need a different view. Notice that when I put my mouse over, I get the red blend lines. If I put my mouse on the image itself, it shows me that particular image. And if I move my mouse outside, then I'm not seeing any of the blend marks. But I'm not getting a very good idea of how these are blending because I'm looking at both series at the same time. So if we go back to source images, what we're going to do is we're going to temporarily take out one of the series and just look at each series individually by itself. So I'm going to click on that. I'm going to click on this. These are my moonlights. I'm going to right click and say exclude from panorama. Doesn't mean they're gone. It just that means when we go back to the panorama editor now, all we're seeing is just the sky itself. And at this point, what you can do is if you're seeing a bad stitch, and this is looking okay, but if you're seeing a bad stitch, you can go back to the mask section of PTGUI in the main window. And what this allows you to do is it sets up the side-by-side adjacent images, and it allows you to say, hey, PTGUI, let's click on this green down here. Definitely include this as part of the blend. And I don't want you to include, let's say, this as part of the blend. And you can go in and mask different portions out to see how you're doing. And then you can return to the panorama editor and it may make some changes and your blends might start to, begin to look a little bit better. So you're going to get in the habit of going back and forth between the mask panel and the panorama editor panel to check your progress on the masking itself. All right, so I'm just going to edit out of this and clear. See, that's the eraser. And so I'm just going to erase all this stuff here. And we'll erase on this side here. And like I said, I think this image is going to blend pretty well together without any masking, but that's how you would do your masking if you needed to create a better edge blend. All right, so we go back to the panorama editor. We're looking good. And then we can go back to our source images. And at this point, I could click here and then shift click here, selecting all of the X'd out images. And once again, right click and say include only selected images. And it just flip flops it. Now these are the ones that are included. So when I go back to my panorama editor, now I'm seeing the blue sky. So, you could, again, check out the blends and see how they're looking. I can see some dark lines here, but I'm not so worried about those because I'm not using the sky. As long as the ground is blending well together, which it is, I've got no problems. So we return to our main window. And as we're working our way down here, we started at Project Assistant. We've seen source images. We've gone in, we've done some masking. We've added all the control points that we need. We can go to Optimizer and hit Run Optimizer. And this is good. It says, hey, this is very good. That's what I want to see. I want to see green. I don't want to see red. If I see red, I'm going to need to go back in and add some control points. But this is good, so I can say, okay. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is skip down all of these and go to Create Panorama. All right. At this point, we've added the control points, we've masked, but right now, only these 6 images are going to get exported as a panorama, which is exactly what we want. We wanted to bring in both series to work with them together, but when we export, we want to do them one at a time. And that way, we'll be able to blend them together in Photoshop. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to ensure that our settings are TIFF 16-bit. All right, we want nice thick files here, nice heavy duty files, and we have to decide where to put them. Once again, I would caution or urge you guys to put them back into the same folder from which they came. All right, so I would need to go down here to pictures, go to Lightroom catalogs, primary catalogs, and then my locations and so on and so forth. And this is, again, a little bit tedious, but if you put them back to where they belong, then you can easily work with them all at the same time. All right, so that would be arches, and then it would be, again, you got to know which folder you put them in, right? This is Winter Pano 24, and this ends up in Milky Way Pano 2. All right, so I'm not going to go ahead and, well, I can hit save and choose that. The next thing I would do is I would amend the end here that says Milky Way, but this is, and let me just make sure of this, which ones are we including now? I'm going to go back to source images. I'm including the moonlight, so only the moonlight is getting exported right now. Back to create panorama. So I would change the end of that naming convention to moonlight. All right. And now it'll be called DSC 6401 Enhanced Noise Reduction Panorama Moonlight. All right. With TIFF and 16-bit set, I would hit create panorama and it would do so. I've already done that, so I'm not going to do it now. The next thing I would do would be go back to source images, and this time click on that image, shift click on the bottom. Once again, right click and choose include only selected images. Just as a reminder here, you guys, I've got screenshots of everything like this, what I'm doing right now in that handout, along with the instructions, what to do. So it's very visual. So you can follow it step by step. Include only selected images. And now when I output my panorama, it's going to be the Milky Way panorama. Okay. So we'll go back to create panorama, and sure, we're at TIFF 16-bit. It's going to the right folder, and this time the name should be not Moonlight, but Milky Way. Okay. Milky Way, whatever. Okay, good enough. And I would hit create panorama. At that point, you have now exported two separate panorama files, and they're going to be back in that folder from whence they came. But here's the thing. You've created these new two files and you've put them into the folder, but Lightroom is not aware of its presence. Lightroom does not know you stuck two more images into that folder. So when you return to Lightroom, it doesn't know those images are in there. So what you do is you right click on that folder and choose synchronize. And when you choose synchronize, it will recognize any new images that have been added to that folder and it will add them into Lightroom. Okay, so I've already synchronized and added my two images in, and here they are. Okay, there's one, there's the other. So before I go any further, questions, people?
Oh, yeah, we've had a lot of fun.
Oh, shoot. Okay. I'm sure you've taken care of them. I have no doubt, Matt.
I've done a bunch of them. And some of them I answered, and I said I would also ask you for your opinion, too. One that I was just typing some answers to came from Ian. You're now out of PTGUI, but this is about PTGUI. In the panorama editor, can you click and drag the sections to adjust the alignment or curvature?
Oh, good question. And what did you tell him?
I was about to say that, yes, you can. And the only time I ever do that is during the initial setup. If PTGUI has no idea whatsoever where to place images, but you can manually click and drag them. It's a dangerous thing to do and causes mayhem. But if you're having initial setup trouble and you just want to roughly position them, it's a great thing to do.
Yeah. So you can see by clicking and dragging, I am now moving that image. But I have to say that I have never seen I've never needed to do that using my NovaFlex gear. Have you, Matt?
It's funny. I was just working on, I'm going to turn on my camera for a second. I was just working on my shot from this, and my tracked panorama shots, the foreground is all blurry, but the stars are sharp. I had to do that. So yeah, I had to roughly position everything first and then ask it to generate control points. And then the panels that it couldn't find control points on, I went back and added those manually. So I did use this particular tool for the same. We were shooting not, hip to hip, but we were within 30 feet of each other. So,
yeah. It was a great night. It was great.
Yeah,
Or a great morning, rather.
True. Good morning. Yeah. So that was one. Ian, I hope that helped. If it didn't, let us know. Also, there was back when you were demonstrating doing the juxtaposition of two images in Photoshop prior to exporting to TIFFs.
Yeah.
There was a little bit of confusion from a couple of people about that process. So maybe you want to just briefly explain why you did that and how you got the information from Photoshop to Lightroom one more time.
Absolutely. I'd be more than happy to do that. And that kind of moves into what we're going to talk about next.
Okay.
Matt, are you seeing Lightroom up on the screen?
Not yet. I'm going to switch it back right now if you want it.
Okay. Yep.
How's that? There you go.
Perfect. Okay. So back in the library module, well, let's start here. Let's start and say, hey, these are the two images that I've just processed. Now, if I put these two images together, the brightness and color of this foreground should blend fairly well with the brightness and color of this background because I did the pre-work before. And the pre-work, once again, was coming up and taking one of the raw files and taking, one of the raw files with the Milky Way, and then its adjacent partner, which would be, here and here. Yep. Taking these two, I could make an adjustment here in the develop module and then go over to the next image and make an adjustment here, but I don't see them together. So I'm guessing, and we lose a little bit when we flip from one image to another as to what they're going to look like, how they're going to look like in the final blend. So what I did was I took these two images and I opened them as photo edit in, open as smart objects into Photoshop. Now, the reason I did this is because if you open them as smart objects, what you're able to do is go to the raw converter to make any changes that you want. So let's get over to Photoshop. It should be up there. Here we go. By opening them as smart objects, I have them both in layers. Now, this is exactly what we're going to do when we blend our final panorama together. This is just sort of a preview. So instead of saying, okay, I want my foreground lighter, so I'm going to create an adjustment layer here and brighten it up, which I could do. This correlation doesn't really tell me much. It's just an adjustment layer. So instead, because I opened it as a smart object, when I double click here, I say, I really want my foreground to be a little bit brighter. So let me add in, let's bring this up to 125 and click OK. Now, when we come back, it automatically updates the foreground image and it's almost there. Boom, there it goes, 125. Now we make our blend, and this is exactly how we're going to make our blend in a few minutes. So I'll skim through this here pretty quickly. I'm going to go select sky and change that selection into a layer mask once it gets selected. Come on, Pokey Puppy. I'm going to change that selection into a mask by clicking the add a mask icon. And now we can see our two images as they're actually going to look when we blend them together. All right. So I'm just making an adjustment here, which we won't need to do later. But now we can see what that foreground looks like with the sky. And I say, yes, I like that exposure of 1.25. So I'm going to close this image out. I've made a note of that. And now I'm going to go back into Lightroom and say, hey, I need all of these foregrounds brightened up. So I click on an image and go to the develop module. And instead of being at, oops, sorry, I clicked on the TIFF files. You guys, my apologies. Here is the raw files here. I click on those and go to the develop module, and that should be 0.8 plus. Yep, here it is, 0.8 plus is exposure. But really, I think it's going to look better in the final blend at 1.25. All right. Now, I would synchronize all of those. Check all. Synchronize. And now all of these images have become a little bit brighter because I know when I do the final blend, it's going to look more realistic with the sky. Okay. So now I would export these all as TIFFs, and that those settings would be baked in, and I bring the TIFFs into PTGUI. So, excuse me. Did the person that asked that question, is that helpful?
I think so. I think there was a little bit of confusion about, because you were aligning things, whether that got saved or not. And
yes.
just reinforcing that all you're doing is trying to get adjust those two images when they're next to each other.
That's it.
So that you can make sure that they look like they belong together, and then grabbing those changes you made and applying them in Lightroom and synchronizing them. Whatever you did in Photoshop in that first section was only to establish that the images look like they belong together, and then everything else is done in Lightroom. You're not saving anything in Photoshop. Exactly
correct, Matt. Very well put. That's it to a T. That's exactly correct.
Excellent.
Yep.
There are more, but you know what? I think we should come to your final payoff landing here with the blending, and we'll answer all the other questions at the end.
Sounds great. All right. So once again, we're back now in Lightroom, and we have our two images side by side. Notice they have the white around the end, so we're going to need to crop them. We'll deal with that later. But let's now bring these into Photoshop to blend them together, the night sky in the foreground. So I'm going to go Photo with both of my images selected. I'm going to go Photo, Edit in, Open as Layers. I don't need to open these as smart objects because they're just TIFF files now. So you would really only open something as a smart object with intent, and you would do it to raw files only. So opening things as smart objects is not something you always want to do. There's got to be a good reason for it. Hopefully you now understand when you might want to do that. All right. So we're going to do Open as Layers in Photoshop. And once again, it'll take those two separate files and create two individual layers within one newly created file inside of Photoshop. So I'll still have these two files here, but I'll have a newly created one. That is going to be a blend between the two. Okay, so let's go to Photoshop. It seems to be taking its time. And here you can see I've got my two layers loaded up. One's called Moonlight, one's called Milky Way. And here's the payoff, you guys, I hope. Let's cross our fingers. If I take my eyeball and turn it off, you can see how there was user error when shooting this, and I didn't align them perfectly. But look at the alignment on all of this. Let's zoom in here a little bit and just look at the alignment here. It's absolutely perfect. That's two separate series blended identical. So between using good equipment and even having user error, and then using PTGUI and putting in enough control points, we have established a perfect match between these two images, even though they were shot hours apart. Okay. So at this point, what we're going to do is I'm going to drag my sky image, my Milky Way, and drag it to the top. Again, look at that little blue line. When the blue line gets to the top there, you can unclick or drop it. Now this will be on top. All right. Then with this image selected or highlighted, I don't want to be on this image down here, folks. I want to be on this image on the top because that's the sky. That's what I want to select. I'm going to go select sky. And once again, this is a selection, and we need to turn this selection into a mask on this upper layer. So I'm going to go down to my front loading washing machine here. That's my nickname. And that is your add a mask icon. And I'm simply going to click it. And it turns that selection into a mask. And we can zoom in. And it's perfect. It's perfect because we did all the right steps. And we added enough control points between all the different series, and blending it becomes effortless inside of Photoshop. All right. So the next step would be, yeah, sure, maybe you want to crop it. Yeah, I don't want my image to display as this. You could crop it here. You could crop it back in Lightroom, you know, whatever you want to do. I'll just do a quick crop here just to get that in. So we don't have to view, let's see. And notice that I overshot it. Let me escape. I overshot the image on either side so that any of this warping out of the image is going to get cropped out anyway. So Matt could probably add into this, and please do if you want to, Matt, but I always add a little bit of extra on the side, knowing I'm going to crop it in the hopes that my stars stay round. Do you find you do the same thing, Matt?
Absolutely, 100% of the time.
Okay. You know why I do that, everybody? Because Matt told me to. That's why I do it. So I knew what Matt was going to say ahead of time. All right. So there we go. There's your image. Now you can just hit File, Save. And if you hit File, Close, it now returns to Lightroom. But if you wanted to, you could go on and make any fine-tuning adjustments you would want to do here. Like I never actually did lighten up that foreground, but it does seem a little dark to me. So I'm going to click back on this layer of the foreground, and this I should have done as I was showing it to you guys, but I didn't. And I'm going to create a curves adjustment layer here. And I'm going to clip the curves adjustment layer to this lower image by hitting this box here. And now you can see this arrow. It says it's only going to adjust this image. It won't adjust any other parts of the image. And so now as I do this, I am just changing the brightness of the foreground. And let's brighten that up just a little bit, somewhere in there. And let's call that good. Now, we could fine tune it all day long, but that's the nuts and bolts of it. All right. So, we're doing okay on time, Matt? Wrap this up.
We are doing great. We have a history, a rich history of taking whatever time it takes to explain the topic at hand at these webinars, because they are being recorded. So you being careful to explain things clearly and slowly and answer questions is a hallmark of this process that we do. So thank you for that.
All right. Yeah. Well, that's kind of the end to the process. And let me just go back over a few things here. All right. If you're just doing an individual panorama and you're not doing blending, there's a lot more, there's more room for slop. All right. You can be a little bit sloppy and you'll probably be okay. But because what Matt and I are doing is we're taking foregrounds and we're taking skies at different times of the day with different brightnesses, and we're trying to blend them together, we need to be very precise. So it starts with good gear out in the field. All right. Then it means good technique. And in this case, you can see even I messed this one up a little bit. but because of the gear and because of PTGUI, I saved it. All right. Then we're going into PTGUI and we're spending the time to put down all the control points. That produces two different series, a Moonlight series and a Milky Way series that align perfectly together. That makes the Photoshop process, where we normally spend abundant amount of time in making masks and things, it makes it so much easier because it's already perfect.
Yep.
All right. That's not to say that you're not going to run into problems with masking. And you can, you could end up with, all kinds of, like little lines around here and edges and things like that. It's a possibility. And that is a whole other webinar in and of itself. Oh, maybe Matt, we should do that sometime. Huh? Yeah. Advanced masking. But the simple and down and dirty way is to do the select sky when you're on your sky layer. And that actually produced a pretty darn good mask. All right. But just as a little hint of things that would come in such a seminar where we're talking about, or webinar where we're talking about masking, notice how I'm seeing a little of this mountain show through in the background. Well, it's mountain and it's not sky. So our sky selection did good, but also notice that it looks a little fake. It looks a little bit bright to my eyes. This should be closer to the darkness of the sky. So that is because this is not being included. And what I'm doing is I'm Alt or Option clicking on my mask to be able to view my mask. So if I was to take a paintbrush and choose white and paint white in here where flip that white and paint white in here, then it would look like the sky. It would be part of the sky mountain rather than the foreground mountain. So let's just see what that did. You can see how it darkened down, right? So let me undo that. By painting white on this mask, I'm actually showing the mountains of the Milky Way image. But of course, if you go out of the lines, it looks crummy. And maybe that looks too dark. So there's lots of things we can do to fix that up. What I'm going to do just for quick and down and dirty is I'm going to grab a quick selection tool and I'm going to try to select around those sandstone peaks so I don't get my paintbrush in there. All right. Now, if I click on my mask and grab my paintbrush, again, paint with white, now I don't have to be super accurate painting with white because the selection is going to contain where the white is being painted. So to see it on the mask, it would be like this. See how I can paint over the sandstone? Nothing happens. All right. So here, what it would look like is paint like that. Now, a couple little tricks just at the end here to send you guys off. I don't like seeing my selection edge while I'm painting. So I am going to go into View, Show, and uncheck selection edges. Now, the selection is still active, but I'm just not seeing it. Okay, next, when I grab white to paint, instead of painting at a full 100%, I'm going to try putting this opacity, rather, I said flow, down to like 20%. Now, watch what happens when I paint. It's going to lighten it up a little bit, but it didn't paint pure white like it did before because I'm only at 28%. So I can slowly go, it's a little too dark or not quite dark enough. Let's do that. All right, that looks good. So really what I did was I painted 40 or 50% white just over that area to make that mountain darker, to make it look more realistic without painting into the sandstone here because I had a selection active. So it's things like that that you're going to, you're going to need to know to move forward to make some really fine-tuning adjustments to your masks. But as far as blending night skies together, using a panorama rig and PTGUI and Photoshop, that's what you got, folks. All right. Who's got questions?
Let's take a look. I just popped it back out to camera view. So in our Q&A, let's see what we have. I had a couple that I marked here. Ian asked, and I did answer him, but I wanted to get your opinion too. Did you find it worthwhile to pick points when you control points and the outer edges for alignment? And what about lens distortion?
So lens distortion, I have taken care of before I bring my images into PTGUI. So I went down and chose inside of Lightroom, enable profile corrections. And you do the same thing, Matt?
I do. I have more to add to that, but go ahead.
Okay. And that is going to help fix that distortion at the edges. The other question is, yeah, I personally think when you have an image like this, if you can put control points in different areas, it's ultimately going to give you a better blend. So I try my best to do that when possible. Yeah.
I completely concur. What I recommend to people is five minimum control points, which you also did, and as widely spaced as possible, as you can see. Because sometimes you can't match things up in all places. Like you might not be able to see some asterisms or, or edges of something to match them up. But as widely as you can, that way it can figure out the geometry of overlapping images. The other thing I might add is that PTGUI is very proud of their ability to correct lens distortions of all kinds. I've tested it both ways, without adding lens distortions and not correcting vignetting and letting PTGUI do it, which they claim is the most optimal way to do it, and correcting those things ahead of time prior to sending it over. Currently, I think that both ways work equally well for the way that we process images. But just keep in mind, if you're not comfortable doing those things, PTGUI knows a lot about what lenses do and do not do well, and can correct those things as part of their processing engine. And they prefer to, but for night photography, it's sort of a little bit different. Our demands are more extreme, if you will.
Yeah, that's cool. I've never experimented with that in the program. So once again, I get to learn from you more about PTGUI.
I feel like no matter how many years I've put into PTGUI, that every time I open it up, I learn a little bit more, like a good piece of software.
Yeah, indeed.
Like a deep piece of software that's very capable. There's always more to learn. Hadley. Hi, Hadley.
Hey, Hadley.
Asked this. So 5 is the minimum number of control points based on your experience. Is there an optimum number of control points?
I got to be honest with you. I know 5 is the minimum, but I tend to put in at least a few more. So I'm usually around 7 or 8. And that's typically what I shoot for. What about you, Matt?
It's the way that I feel is, does it stitch? That's my water test. If I look at the panorama editor and something looks off, I will add more control points. But once I hit that minimum of 5, it seems like it usually has enough information to correct the geometry and apply proper blending.
Well, yeah, it's funny when I get in there with that putting in the control points. I know it's tedious, but it's somehow meditative.
Oh my god!
And so Hadley, 5 is the minimum, but if some is good, more is better. I just kind of keep meditating on those dots and putting it in. So,
did you have fun with memory games when you were a child?
Yeah.
You did. Okay. Yeah. I bet you play Wordle too.
Yeah. And I actually do not clean my image sensor because I enjoy spotting the images afterwards. So no, I'm just kidding.
Oh man. So Joan says, it seems like I can see the seams at the top of the sky where 4 or 5 images have been stitched. Can this be corrected with more work in Photoshop? Let me take a lead on that one.
Okay.
What happens with Tim when Tim zoomed way out on the image and he compressed it in Photoshop? Sometimes Photoshop has screen rendering errors and you'll see something like that. I'm sure you were about to say the same thing, Tim.
No. The way you put it is exactly correct.
I think that's an artifact of Photoshop trying to make it small and make everything look there. There actually are no stitching errors. When he zoomed into 100%, you couldn't see any blending or vignetting stitching errors. So always evaluate something like that at 100% and not at the small view.
Yeah, that's correct. And also, I think it does a pretty good job rendering at 50% because it's even math, but 100% for sure is where you should be for anything, folks. Anytime you're looking at anything, whether it's masking, always go into 100% to ensure that you're seeing the real deal.
Yep. So I'm just going to add this. We're probably going to get a couple more questions as we're wrapping it up. But Tim, you did a real bang up job, man. This is a big topic to approach, and to get through all of that in the amount of time that you did was a world record. So,
well, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you for your help.
You're welcome.
Yeah. I got to say, folks, this is really a Matt and Tim presentation because we worked on this together. So.
We love learning together, and we love teaching what we learn, and what a gift, right? So we also, speaking of which, we run other classes. You may know of National Parks at Night. We run in-person workshops. One of them is the Pano Intensive. Tim and I ran the Pano Intensive together this year. Where were we, Tim?
Arches. This workshop right here. Yeah, we just saw the image. Yeah.
So next year we haven't announced for our season 10 workshops where we're going to hold the Pano Intensive. But if this sort of thing interests you and you'd like to do it in person, we do in-person workshops. And specifically the Pano Intensive is a small group workshop where you get a lot of personal attention. And we go, concept to capture, planning and processing throughout the entire week. We're also, next week, there's a wait list for it now, but we're doing processing panoramas live over Zoom, and that's 4 sessions. You could join the wait list for it if you wanted to. I'm going to post the link here. That would give us an indication that you'd like to attend future ones. If we get a bunch of people signing up for the wait list, we might add another session. Tim and I have some time in the summer here, so maybe we'll add another session if enough of you want to learn more about this. And we'll cover everything from Lightroom Pano processing to Photoshop Pano processing, where they fall short, and then even deeper dive into using PTGUI and blending in Photoshop afterwards. It's very, very deep. If you in general would like to join our wait list or sign up for a future workshop, I'm going to paste that in there too right now. We are entering our 10th season of hosting workshops and photo tours, and we couldn't be more thrilled. It's going to be a big year. There's a lot of cool destinations coming. If you're not on our mailing list, get on it, and you'll be one of the first people to know about where we're going in our 10th year.
Yeah. Not to mention, much like Novaflex here, giving out all this wonderful free information at our site, National Parks at Night, you will also be able to access tons of free information in the form of our blog, which is basically like almost mini books or articles every time we write one. And there's just a ton from the past 10 years.
Right. I will post that link right now. So we've been doing this for a while, and we love what we're doing, and obviously we enjoy it. So there's a bunch of links there for those of you who have come and been here live. Thank you for your generous attention and questions. This is not where it ends. If you have more questions and you're watching this on the replay, please leave a comment on YouTube. We monitor that, and we'll get back to you as quickly as we can. And if you have other questions that you don't want to ask in such a public way, just hit reply to the email. If you were invited to this or you signed up for it, we'll reply to that email. And again, if you're on YouTube, we'll check the comments regularly. Tim, you're a superstar, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks to Novaflex for having me here today and just producing such great gear. It's changed my world, I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
Me too. You can't do it without the gear. And I went from being Pano curious to a Pano fanatic as soon as I understood the value of repeatable accuracy, having the click stops and the precision that NovaFlex offers me, both from the tripod and the Pano rig. After that, it made approaching the complex preparation for looking at a scene and saying, I can render this, and I can render it faithfully. That inspired me to dig even deeper into the process. And that's where we encountered PTGUI, and we're like, oh, well, these two things kind of belong together, the right capture gear and the right processing gear. The whole suite, really, Lightroom and Photoshop and PTGUI, all those things work together. So yes, it's a little bit to bite off and chew, but I think once you get it, it sticks and you totally understand how to approach it, and it changes how you shoot in the future. And that's the thrill that I get from doing it. And I hope that you feel that too. I
do. And, as a matter of fact, I remember Chris quite some time ago saying, oh yeah, I really like the click stops. And this was before I had any NovaFlex gear. And I'm like, I don't need click stocks. I could just estimate it. And then, I realized how important that is, especially to night photographers. Just because, I mean, you just can't see that kind of stuff at night. And that repeatability is just so important.
It was a revelation.
Yeah.
Well, Martin, thanks for hosting us. Thanks for being here in the chat with us, Martin, and for you and the rest of the team at NovaFlex making such wonderful gear. And Tim, thanks for your generosity. This was a lot to put together. I'm sure that people will be enjoying this for years to come.
I hope so. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, everybody. We will see you at the next webinar. We'll see you on YouTube. We appreciate your time, and thanks for sitting under Tim's learning tree for an hour and change here. Until next time, Tim, you're the best. Thanks, man. And 5,